There is a widely held belief that Erasmus is or was only about students and young persons. And it's true that Erasmus is about students and young persons, but not just students and young persons. It's also something which teachers, trainers, and youth workers can utilize and benefit from. Also, adults in education and training, and grassroots sports organizations as well. So, contrary to popular belief, it is not just a youth exchange scheme, it is a lifelong learning and mobility program. So, whatever the British government comes up with, or even the Welsh government, it's not going to be the same. It's not going to match what Erasmus did and what Erasmus can do for us if we go into it. So, with all due respect to the Welsh government's tithe uh, scheme, thank you for trying, but it's still not enough. Sorry, we need to be in the full Erasmus. So, by way of an example, in the 1990s, 2000s, up until the beginning of the teens, I was a university lecturer at Swansea Institute, which became Swansea Metropolitan, which became University of Wales Trinity St David's. I was in Swansea Business School, and we had Erasmus links with several countries, probably one or two that I'm unaware of, but I am aware that we had very close links with Spain through institutions in Cordoba and in other parts of Spain as well, and also with Finland and with Brittany in Quimper and in Brest. We had student exchanges and we had lecturer exchanges as well. So, for example, a UK lecturer would teach for 2 weeks in Spain, and a Spanish lecturer would come over and speak and teach in Swansea. Often the lecturer would teach in their own language with an interpreter, but we were encouraged to try to teach in the guest country's language if we possibly could, which I just about managed myself when I went over to Cordoba and taught for a bit in Cordoba, because my mother was Spanish, so I've got some Spanish. It goes a little bit beyond una cerveza más, por favor. I can do some academic stuff in Spanish as well. When I went to Finland, it wasn't worth my even trying. If you've seen anything of the Finnish language, you'll know that you don't have to worry, because everyone, and I mean everyone in Finland, speaks English either as their second or third language. When I started going to Finland, that wasn't the case. The bus driver wouldn't speak English, or the young lady serving coffee in Starbucks or wherever didn't speak English. But over 20 years, you noticed English being taken on everywhere as a deliberate um, policy in Finland. In the background here, you can see two students, Elsa and Sebastian. I think they're a case study of Erasmus. Um, Sebastian was a Dutch student studying in Swansea for 3 years. Elsa came over for a semester from Cordoba for 1 semester in Swansea. Sebastian and Elsa became an item. And when my head of department heard that I had family in Andalusia and asked me would I like to go to Cordoba to do a fortnight's teaching in the business school there, I thought about it for a microsecond and said yes. And when I was out there, it was the week of the Rocio festival. Trini will know what I'm talking about. One of the biggest things that happens in Spain, where hundreds, thousands of people gather in Rocio, a town in Andalusia, for a religious festival. While I was in Cordoba, I'd hired a car, and another Erasmus lecturer called Aki from Kuopio in Finland was there. And we had some adventures driving around Andalusia and going to Rocio and the other places. And I remember there was one occasion we were driving along, mind your own business, and something went tiddly dee tiddly dee tiddly dee dee. And he pulled this thing out of his pocket, and it was the most miraculous thing I'd ever seen in my life. It was a mobile phone. And he spoke to his relatives in Finland. And I thought, well, this is just magic, but it wasn't. It was pure science. And uh, um, Finland was there first. A lecturer. So out of that, I got an invite to Kuopio. And the return lecturer who came back to Swansea under the Erasmus scheme was not a Finnish person, but a Chinese person who was living and working in Finland. And she came over. It was, I think it must have been the year 1999, 2000. And she came over and gave us a few lectures on globalization and alerted us to something which people had hardly noticed in Britain, which was the rise of China as a global power. And of course, in Finland, they'd already cottoned on to this, and there were departments there of people speaking Chinese and getting ready to trade with the Chinese. So, what nationalities and what countries have I mentioned? I've mentioned Wales, Holland, Spain, Brittany, Finland, China. These links between students and lecturers and lifelong educators have a value which can be measured in pounds and pence, but their true value can't be calculated. It's immense. And looking around in 2025, what's the most important international commodity? Is it oil? Is it rare earths? No, it's not. The most important international commodity is peaceful cooperation and education, and those commodities are the most important resources of all. And the fact that there are Spanish students who think of a little town in Wales as being one of their alma maters, and there are people in Wales who think of a Spanish college as being one of their alma maters. This is something incredibly valuable, and the lesson is that international cooperation is not a zero-sum game. Trump and Farage think it is. They think it's a zero-sum game. There's got to be a winner and a loser. But if we cooperate and mix internationally, it benefits everyone. Okay, so that's my little talk. We'll move on now then to
Charles. Sorry to interrupt you, but Ollie, I think, wants to talk.
Oh, sorry, Ollie. I'm a very poor chairperson. I can't actually see your hand raised.
And unmute.
Just wanted to say welcome to all the politics students here. Just use this talk as like a little baser just to hear both sides of the argument and like the case for like youth mobility. So just want to say a quick welcome. That was pretty much what I wanted to say. Sorry about the background issues on that one.
Okay, thanks, Ollie.
Sorry
Okay,
about that, guys.
can we bring Trini in now then, please? Trini, will you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Charles. Thank you very much for inviting me and for asking me to speak here. It was lovely to hear Charles. I think my story kind of, links a little bit into it because I was one of those very early Erasmus students who was able to take advantage of the Erasmus exchange. From that follows that it was a very long time since I was a student, but I do remember still the excitement of those university years of learning new things and meeting new people, and obviously of the freedom of being away from my parents. I want to tell you about my story with Erasmus. That's what I'm here for. But before I start telling you about it, I don't want you to think that I'm just some old fogey who's going to tell you about some mythical age, golden age, because I have to tell you that I'm from Spain, as Charles just said. And when I was born, Spain was still a dictatorship. Okay. That meant living in a very close society where all faces look the same. Okay. As a way of an example, and Charles will know what I'm talking about here, in our Epiphany parade with the three kings, this, if you've not heard of it, is what happens on the 5th of January. And the three kings, or the three wise men, are the people who bring presents to Spanish children. One of the kings, is black. Now, when I was a kid, that guy was always played by a local whose face had to be painted black. Okay, so I am giving you this example as so you get an idea of how not cosmopolitan and not international we were at the time. Okay, and also I come from the very south of Spain. My hometown is called Almeria, and again, Charles will know a little bit about it because I think that's where his roots are, which is great. That means I was closer to Africa than to anywhere else in Europe. Okay, and that meant I had very few opportunities to hear other languages being spoken, other European languages, and and had very few opportunities to travel to these countries. Okay, so when Erasmus came, that meant I was able to travel there and going to a UK university. If I hadn't, I might never have known, for example, that Wolverhampton is in the UK. Believe it or not, one of my fellow students thought that it was in Germany, and I wouldn't have known that the Brummy accent was so difficult to master. You might have thought it was in Germany for all I knew. And being able to improve my English was very important for me because I was studying translation and interpreting. Okay, so coming doing an Erasmus exchange for me meant I was able to improve my English significantly. But that was not even the most important thing. The most important thing was getting to know the idiosyncrasies of the British culture. So as you can see, that Erasmus was really real for me, and it changed not only my perspective on things, but it's also changed my life because my now husband, was also one of those UK students who I met during my Erasmus exchange, and who then was lucky enough to come to my own university, which is Granada in the south, in Andalusia, which on his own Erasmus exchange. So that means we had like a double Erasmus in our case. But most importantly, it also brought huge numbers of people from the whole of Europe, together. And it still does to this day. Unfortunately, not for the UK anymore because of Brexit. As you know, Erasmus is a European project. There are others better qualified than me to tell you the more technical details of it. And as Charles has said, it isn't just about student mobility. But for me, that was the important part, the fact that it funds EU students to go to study in any other EU university. And the students pay their fees in their home university, and then they're taken care of in the destination university. It also provides a grant, that covers, in my case at least, it covered most of my expenses. And my destination university, Wolverhampton, also helped with finding student accommodation. So basically, it allows you to live and to experience being in a foreign university as if it were your own. Okay. And like I said, I don't want to talk about the technical details. I just want to talk about the advantages and the experience that you are able to get. And when I went on Erasmus, I had to fight to get on Erasmus. I was one of those people who went on one of the first few years. My year of the year of my exchange was 1992, and the program started in 1987. So not many people knew about it. But also in my degree, everyone wanted to do a full year abroad because of the languages, but there were only very few placements that were full year placements. So those were assigned on the basis of your grades, which in my case meant that I could only come for a semester. Okay, like the student that Charles mentioned. But in those days, very few people knew about Erasmus. Nowadays, millions of Europeans, go on their Erasmus year. It's like a rite of passage, almost like your gap year in the UK, that I never heard of before. University students would go from all over Europe, regardless of the degree that they're studying, because it is not just about languages, even though languages was very important for me. It's very important for everyone to get the opportunity to study abroad and experience a different life. It's important to know that things can be done in a different way somewhere else, and that our way isn't always the best way or even the only way. And it allows you to experience a life that you just would not be able to experience in your own country. And in my view, it gives you a more complete view of the world. If you're a doctor, for example, your patients won't always speak English, but also they might have a rare disease that is rare in the UK, but common somewhere else. And if you've been in that other country, then that will help you recognize it. If you're studying business, and if you think that all your customers speak English, I've got news for you, they don't. And even if they can get by in English, which maybe a lot of them will, do they really understand the way business is done in the UK? Because business is also all about culture. For example, I'll give you an example. Vauxhall used to have a car in the UK called the Nova. Okay, you might think it's a fine name until you realize that in Spanish, no va means it doesn't go, it doesn't work. So nobody asked, the people in Vauxhall for the view of someone, from a Spanish-speaking country. But it's not just the only thing. If you're studying art or history or politics, I think understanding our interconnected world would be helpful. And even if you're doing a STEM subject, you might think that's not relevant to you. But remember, Einstein published his theory of relativity in German. Okay. And also different cultures present problems in different ways and may have devised solutions for them. And for example, taking into account that we're living in a warming world, maybe the solutions for cooling that we have in warmer countries might also be useful, for the UK. Even lawyers can benefit of an Erasmus, and I should know this because my husband's one of them. Lawyers need to understand words, and learning other languages helps with that, but they also need to understand behavior, human behavior, and exposing yourself to other cultures will also help with that. And then if you don't speak other languages, that's okay. There are universities in some European countries who teach degrees in English too. So even if you're not there for the language, you could still get the Erasmus experience. But also the best thing about Erasmus is not what happens in the classroom, is what happens outside. It allows British kids from an ordinary background to get the chance to live and meet alongside other Europeans, like Germans and Belgians, allows them to socialize with Italians and Romanians, and maybe even fall in love with Spanish or Spaniards. In my university, for example, in Granada, they were all made very welcome. Everybody wanted to socialize with them, and not just because of being able to practice their English. Erasmus introduced British kids to churros for breakfast, okay, and foreign ones, Spanish ones, to porridge, whether it's to have dinner at 10 p.m. like we do in Spain, or to get used to having it at 6 p.m., which for me was a shock, or whether it's putting salt and vinegar on your chips instead of mayonnaise or ketchup. All students experience these different lives. Do you know how baffling it is for a Spaniard, those traditional British bathroom lights where you just, pull the little cord down? I know they're not so common anymore, but I remember taking a few days to work out how to use them. Anyway, those kids were able to see, and are still able to see, that life can be lived in different ways. And it can sometimes lead them to appreciate the way things are done in the UK, and other times to spot things that could be improved here. And that experience enriches lives and broaden horizons. And it's more than just about learning. And also these Erasmus friendships can endure, as Charles showed us in the photo, and as I'm an example of. And the evidence of that is the more than 1 million Erasmus babies that are around there, like my own, whose parents met through Erasmus. So all of this was available to British students. And I know there are some students here today. So just so you know, you could study in any EU country. You wouldn't have to worry about visas like you do now. you wouldn't have to worry about providing health certificates. You would be entitled to healthcare as in on the same basis as any other resident. It's like it was yours, as of right, but it was taken away from you. And if you were not able to vote, back in 2016 because you were not old enough, you may have heard that this was the result of a democratic decision. But what you got to remember is that democratic decisions can be changed democratically as well. And we've had 3 general elections since 2016. So the result should not be binding forever. Okay, so I will never forget those who took it away from you, and neither should you. I would say you should demand the return of what's rightfully yours, okay? For yourselves, if you're students, and if not, for your own children or maybe for your grandchildren, because their future will be better for it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Trini. Yeah, and my car was a Ford Cortina in Spain, the Taurus, because Cortina in Spanish is the curtain. Thanks for that, Trini. We've got a very Hispanic sort of bias, but we're going to Wales now, even though Carmen could be the cigar factory worker in Seville, but she isn't. She could be if she wanted to be, but she'd pass it off, I'm sure. But over to you, Carmen. She is. I got to say this because I'm so proud of her. She is the youngest life peer, not just the youngest life peer, but the youngest life peer ever. Over to Carmen.
Thanks, Charles, for the introduction. And I would just like to build a bit on what Charles and Trini actually spoke about, but also just first of all as an introduction. So I'm Carmen Smith. As Charles mentioned, currently a member of the House of Lords, where I represent Plaid Cymru, but also try and also represent a bit of a younger voice there too, as the youngest member there. But a way of a background as well. So I have always been very pro the European Union and led the youth organisations vote around so the youth organisations campaign in relation to the People's Vote campaign, and have always been a supporter of the EU and hope that one day we will return to the EU. And I got a really good opportunity to work in the European Parliament in the past, and was one of the last young people from the UK that got that opportunity to do so. I was one of those that maybe some others on the call might have had a similar experience, but I was one of those that on my staff pass in the European Parliament, I had the deadline date, the Brexit date in 2020. So everyone knew that you were an assistant to an MEP in the UK if you had that date around your neck. Basically, everyone else had a longer one, and we had just 2020 written on our staff passes. But yeah. So that's just a bit of a background, really. But something that's really important to me is actually those lost voices, particularly young people that have just never had those opportunities. And as Trini pointed out, well, the vote actually happened in 2016, which is almost 10 years ago now. Isn't that wild? 10 years ago. So there's a lot of young people in schools, colleges, universities that won't really have any idea of what the EU meant as well, in terms of from what it was like to be a member and what we benefited, particularly in Wales, how we benefited from being a member. And I know that many people on this call as well had lots of involvement with the creation of Erasmus too, and the development of the scheme in the past. But as Charles mentioned, when we're looking at now, there has been the TYPE scheme in Wales, which is of course better than not having a scheme. But something that I was disappointed in is that with TYPE you can't apply as an individual, for example. You have to have basically it has to be like you have to be at an education provider or that has that interest in putting an application forward for a group of young people. So, and that's what was really, I think, really important about Erasmus in terms of getting people from all different backgrounds, is the fact that individuals could apply rather than you having to be linked to a specific school that had that committed individual that would apply on behalf of the whole school. But then looking ahead, so the scheme, you might have seen in recent days as well, there's been mention yet again of the possibility of introducing a new youth mobility scheme again, which is great. But my main concern is actually, what does that look like? And we know, as in there's been loads of briefings into media over the last few years, that the EU is very open to us having a scheme and forthcoming to have those discussions and make it happen. But the UK government haven't been responsive back, and just aren't treating it as a priority. And I think the fact that the EU are being so forthcoming, it means that we could shape a scheme that works even better than last time. And I think it's important that it's different from the original schemes, because of things have changed. So those young people that couldn't be part of Erasmus because we couldn't be at that point. Since then, not only obviously they've lost that opportunity for learning and jobs and meeting people in different countries, but since then we've had the isolating experience of COVID. So that has also changed how younger people socialise as well. And I think it actually is more of an argument of why you need a youth mobility scheme to more promote, like, having more younger people meeting different cultures. I think it's really, really important, and it's really popular. So it's not just us on this call that think it's a good idea. There's, as many of you will know, it is popular with YouGov polling. Like 7 in 10 people surveyed support introducing a scheme of around 200,000 people between EU and UK for working and learning. So it is popular. So that's why I think it's really important that we do keep pushing, and that's why campaigns like that Wales for Europe are running with going into, well, holding stalls at universities and colleges. It is really important so that people have that discussion and know it's possible. And then just going back to, I suppose, what that could look like, something that I'm really passionate about in terms of how we shape a future scheme is actually recognising that there are a lot of people also in their 30s now that didn't get an opportunity to work, live, learn in the EU, and are early in their careers, have been early in their careers in Wales and across the UK, where there isn't many decent graduate jobs, and have been struggling, and would really, really value being able to participate in a scheme where they could work and live abroad. So I think that's really important to consider, is actually also the expanding the age eligibility, as I think that a lot of us would agree that such a scheme, we want people that perhaps haven't had many opportunities in the past to be able to experience something that is going to open up more doors for them. And I think that includes those people perhaps in their 30s that have been that kind of generation where they've missed lots of opportunities. So just to close, and I'm sure a lot of people have other comments to make as well. I just do generally believe that we must continue putting the pressure on. Like I certainly will too, but I just don't think that the UK government feel like it's a priority for them, and they're not feeling that pressure. And I think it is important that we continue putting that pressure on, as you know, as we've discussed, all of those benefits are really important, and it's a step closer to a better relationship with the EU too.
Thank you, Carmen. So now our fourth formal speaker is Madalena Kay, who's representing the young European movement, as I understand it. Adelina, you can introduce yourself. Welcome, Adelina, over to you.
Hi everyone. So I'm the Youth Engagement Officer at European Movement, which means that I'm working very closely with YEM UK on their campaign this year, which was decided after a consultation of their membership as to what was of value to the members, and what they wanted YEM to focus on was Erasmus Plus and youth mobility, which is not entirely surprising because it has been in the news a lot recently. I think it's worth just remembering that when Brexit happened, we did not have to leave Erasmus Plus. There are many countries outside of the EU member states who participate in the programme, and it was a choice of the Conservative government at the time to leave this programme. So I think there's been some very good movement and signs from the new Labour government in the right direction, especially after the announcement at the EU-UK summit, where it was agreed to be agreed that the UK would rejoin Erasmus Plus and also establish this youth experience scheme. However, we need to keep up the pressure to ensure that they deliver on what they promised. So that is the focus of YEM's campaign this year. The campaign has been called Open Doors, Open Futures, and it is focusing on both the Youth Experience Scheme and Erasmus Plus, and I'm hoping that they might broaden out even further to include other opportunities for youth mobility, such as Creative Europe, or campaigning for lower tuition fees for EU students in the UK and vice versa, etc. So I think YEM's campaign with regards to the youth experience scheme really wants to work on defining what that looks like, because the conversation about it has been very nebulous and generalized, and nobody really knows what they mean by a youth experience scheme. And what we don't want is Turing 2.0, because that has widely been considered a failure. And just recently talking to a YEM member, a very active YEM member who participated in the Turing scheme, what he said was that it was limited to 6 months, and that they did not properly vet the accommodation that he stayed in Japan, and there was a mold problem, and the dorm manager was racist, and he had a very, very bad experience through this scheme. And we need to avoid this happening, and we need to make sure that we are participating in the gold standard scheme, which is Erasmus Plus, and not thinking that, you know, English exceptionalist mindset that we can do something better by ourselves, because we can't. So that's why we're also focusing on rejoining Erasmus Plus, because it is the flagship program of the EU. It is one of their greatest success stories. As Carmen rightly said, there is huge public support for rejoining the program. I think with regards to what we should be asking and focusing on is the fact that Erasmus Plus was not just for students, university students. It's a massive trope, a myth that it's just middle-class privileged kids who participate in this scheme. It's absolutely not true, and it's a narrative that we really need to focus on debunking. Around 50% of the funding of Erasmus Plus was higher education. The rest was on adult education, schools, vocational training, and opportunities for sports, clubs, etc. So it's a hugely diverse program that is reaching people also from disadvantaged backgrounds who otherwise would never have this kind of opportunity to experience other cultures, and and these opportunities for mobility. The other thing that we really should be demanding of the government is that they adequately, if we rejoin Erasmus Plus, is that they adequately promote it to ensure that it reaches those people, those young people that most need it. That's the key thing that we need to demand of them. When I was studying at university, I didn't even know Erasmus Plus existed. I didn't know it was a thing. And I come from a middle class background, so we really have to make sure that everybody knows about it, everybody knows that the opportunity is available to them, and that those from disadvantaged backgrounds are the priority to be reached through the funding. So YEM is launching their campaign in an online launch next week on Monday, 6:30 p.m. I will share the Eventbrite link in case anybody wants to join us. Ellie Chowns, MP for the Green Party, will be speaking alongside someone from Youth for Inclusive Europe, some of YEM's board members, and Andrew Hadley from the Centre for International Learning and Leadership. We're also going to have a campaign launch in Parliament, hopefully, in collaboration with the National Erasmus campaign, which is being led by European Movement, obviously Wales for Europe included in that, but also involving other organisations, and they will be publishing a report shortly in order to lobby MPs. And YEM are also really trying to reach students across the UK through Freshers' Fairs at the moment. We are having a presence at 12 across the UK, which I think is the best for YEM. And we're also trying to provide opportunities for the YEM members in the UK, many of whom are actually foreign nationals who are living in the UK. So we're participating in the EU-UK Youth Dialogue, which is happening in November, and it's organised by the EU delegation. And also some trainings events as well, to ensure that young people's voices are at the forefront of these conversations and they have the opportunity to put forward their views, make it clear their demands and what they want to see from Erasmus Plus, from the Youth Experience Scheme, and really emphasize to decision makers how important it is for young people to have these opportunities. The younger generation has been so set back by COVID, by Brexit, and they've had so much taken away from them. The cost of living crisis is real, and a lot of them are struggling with mental health illness as a result of this, and giving them a glimmer of hope and giving them these opportunities, to develop professionally and educationally, which will put them ahead in the very, very tough jobs market that they currently face, will mean a huge amount to them. And I really think it's time for the government to put young people as a priority in national decision making. Yeah, I think that's everything I want to say on that, and I'll just share in the chat the link to YEM's campaign and launch event in case it's interesting for anyone here.
Thank you, Madalena. And thanks to Ollie, Carmen and Trini for their earlier contributions as well. We'll go over now then to Q&A. If anybody wants to ask a question or make a statement, could you raise a hand using the Zoom facility for hand raising? Anthony's waving an actual hand rather than a virtual one, so come in then please, Anthony. You need to unmute, Anthony.
Hang on.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. No, sorry. All the signs seem to change every time I do a Zoom call. No, I'm. Thank you very much for organising this. I wish there were many more of us online, because I think they're missing some excellent points being made. I'm very much linked to the early days of Erasmus, but a lot of things that were very relevant then are very relevant now. And I think it was Ollie or Carmen who made the point that one of the great things about Erasmus was that it allowed mobility by people who, in normal circumstances, would never have had a chance to do it unless they were lucky enough either to have wealthy parents or be at one of the relatively few higher education institutions that had a tradition of study abroad. And I make this point because I was appalled when the previous British government launched its very weak Poundland Erasmus touring, I think it called itself, and kept on saying that the great advantage of touring was that it was going to allow young people who didn't have the links, the contacts, and the wealthy background and elite universities to study abroad. And that was such absolute nonsense, because that's exactly the revolution in terms of student mobility, anyhow, that Erasmus brought to generations of students that would never have had it otherwise. I say this as someone, I did study abroad, and the year I spent abroad, I had to, of course, in those days, had to repeat it when I came back. And the second point is, and I think this is terribly important, and this really sort of came to the fore when Carmen was talking about the huge advantage, blah, blah, blah. And it's absolutely true. But we must not forget now that several generations of students have now passed through the system who've never had the chance of Erasmus or any other significant mobility scheme, because Turing, of course, is famous for coming up late for the fairly weak support that it gives students in the first place. So I think there is a great urgency here, and I think there is an important point to be made about the current youth mobility scheme being discussed and not pushed hard enough, I think, by the current government, despite their fairly upbeat statements after the summit with the EU. And that is that we must get it going. We mustn't try and make it perfect and bigger and wider and think. We've got to get it going, because until we get it going, another generation will go through without the opportunity that these sort of schemes give. That's it from me, and well, some of you will know I keep on hoping that Howell Surrey Jones will be greatly celebrated, and I hope will in some way be egging us on in trying to get collaboration with the EU on youth mobility and interinstitutional cooperation, because that's a point that's been made. Erasmus was much more than just student mobility. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Howard, come in, please.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm Howard Williamson from University of South Wales. Well, Anthony said many things that I completely support, and we had a little exchange in the chat about Howell Surrey Jones and how Erasmus had actually emerged from language learning programs for French assistants and people like that. So it goes back as far as 1972, 1973. It took 14 years for Erasmus to be formed in 87, then Youth for Europe in 88, and then a whole range of youth programs, which are the ones that I've been involved in. And then in 2011, it was not going to be called Erasmus Plus. It was going to be called the YES program originally. And that was the commissioner's idea. It was youth, education and sports. But Erasmus was the strong brand of all those other ones, Leonardo and Grundtvig and Comenius and all these other weird sounding European programs for schools and for adult learners and for vocational students and so on and so forth. So that's why it became called Erasmus Plus. And what we are forgetting, and it has been a great debate, Anthony's absolutely right, what a lot of excellent points have been made, but the budget for the youth, for the overall Erasmus Plus program in 2014 to 21, and now again, we're not quite sure how it's all going to pan out in the next multi-annual financial settlement, but the budget has increased and increased and increased. It has been a fantastic opportunity for young people in Europe, and we have missed out on that for the reasons that have been mentioned. Andrew Hadley was mentioned, and I wrote in the chat that Andrew's been very, very, very central in making these arguments. And I joined this call and I learn about lots of other outfits that are arguing the same thing that I've been arguing and with other groups. And what shocks me is how we haven't managed to develop, you know, I suppose the trendy term is coalition of the willing. And next week is the first Youth Ministers Conference, Council of Europe Youth Ministers Conference in Malta, the first one since 2012. And I'm not sure what the UK delegation is going to be saying, but whether it's going to really be making arguments that we're making today about youth exchange, youth experience, youth mobility, whatever you want to call it, I'm not sure. It's been a very poor sort of campaign, and we should celebrate Wales and Taith. For all its limitations, we have tried very, very hard to give young people some sort of equivalence to Erasmus Plus. And Anthony Wright, I love his Poundland version of touring, but of course, England was slightly buggered up because DCMS was responsible for youth and the Ministry of Education, Department for Education, was responsible for universities. So it wasn't possible for, well, it could have been done, but it was more difficult for England. Northern Ireland has managed to kind of align with Republic of Ireland. So young people in Northern Ireland have not suffered as much as other young people in other parts of the UK. And Scotland has looked rather enviously at Wales and Taith. I think our challenge will be, if we do, and my last point, our challenge will be how we try to sort of reduce Taith if we manage to reconnect with Erasmus Plus, so that we don't leave a vacuum and we don't leave a void. And we may not have an automatic sort of re-engagement with the whole of Erasmus Plus. As speakers have said, you don't have to even be in the EU to be part of Erasmus Plus. North Macedonia is in there and a few other places. So it's very possible to reconnect and rejoin, but the terms and conditions may be a bit different, and we need to make sure that we at least hold on to our baseline of Taith and then build from there. So that was my sort of policy point, I suppose, for Wales. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you then, Tom.
Hi, thanks ever so much. My name is Tom. I work for the Welsh Centre for International Affairs. I think I've got a few little points. So we obviously spoken a lot about Erasmus Plus and sort of youth experiences, and I detest the fact that we have to say experiences, not abilities. But there is one quite glaring thing missing from that, which is ESC programme. Erasmus Plus is separated out, even though they're sort of loosely linked. The UK government and the EU the UK government hasn't specifically said that rejoining the European Solidarity Corps is part of this broader EU-UK youth experience extravaganza, for want of better words. And the great thing about ESC is that it enables young people to do volunteering placements across the Erasmus sort of country members, and is a fantastic way to capture young people who may not go to university or may not be affiliated with the type of organizations who have the capacity to apply for Erasmus funding or to go through the Erasmus funding system. So what I would strongly suggest is that we lobby whoever we can to make sure that ESC is very much on that agreement when it is signed. We sort of talk about, again, getting things sort of done. The Department for Education has already gone out to tender, or is starting the tendering process for the national agency to run Erasmus+. And there are a number of options that they've put on the table, one of which, well, I'll go through them all actually. One is having a singular UK national agency. The other would be devolved national agencies to each home nation. And the third would be one agency per strand of the Erasmus Plus scheme. And I think the nature of what the national agency will look like will very much affect how successful or not we are in ensuring that underrepresented people can actually access Erasmus Plus opportunities or experiences. I'm very much of the mindset that Wales has the expertise, thanks to TIFE, to properly administer as a national agency. And further than that, especially in the youth sector, TIFE has been fantastic in getting underrepresented groups and young people to take up international placements. Two very quickly last things. When it gets down to the details of how things will be sort of laid out in the agreement, I think it's really important that the UK government is made aware of how certain aspects of the visa process, or the proposed visa process, specifically around the immigration healthcare surcharge, can be incredibly detrimental and off-putting to young people who are wanting to come to the UK as part of the mobility scheme. And it, in effect, creates a tiered system by which, unless you or your welcoming organisation can afford to pay up to £1,000 per year for healthcare, then you're effectively cut out of this. And there's also broader aspects about UK government has mentioned there might be bilateral agreements with certain countries with regards to youth experiences. What are the forms that these will take? Is it an in-out? Is it quota-based? So I guess the main point is that there's a lot of still unknowns, and rejoining is in 2027 at the earliest point. They're looking to announce a tender, a lead tender by end of summer 2026. So things are already moving along. And I would suggest that if we as the sector are not already starting to put things into place now, then we'll end up with a highly centralised, London-based national agency, which is not particularly helpful to the people of Wales.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Next hand raised is Phil.
Hello, and an interesting evening. I think it's well worthwhile going through these topics. We were very privileged, really, in many ways, to spend Saturday this last week at a Precious Fair. And I came away feeling positive about it because it was a very busy day. We had a great reaction from the students, and they were very keen on the targets as had been set by the European movement. And
where was that, Phil?
This was at Bournemouth.
Sorry?
Bournemouth University.
Okay, thanks.
And so I would recommend that all of us, really, if we are living in various parts of the country, do get in touch. Those of us who are trying to get involvement of universities within this programme and getting young people's views, to go to their universities. And we've had tremendous help from the student union at Bournemouth because, they're very keen to offer these various different activities apart from freshers. They're contemplating that we get involved with maybe having a European club, because we can have club members of of English and European students within the university. That's a work in progress. We're gaining a lot of contact with the university, and I think it looks as if it's going to be quite good for the time to come. Various things that came out of that positive reaction. In numerous conversations with these young people, overwhelmingly, they wanted the same rights and privileges and European opportunities as had been available to their parents. That was quite clear in just chatting to them. They were excited to hear that progress was being made, albeit far too slowly on this youth experience and Erasmus programme. And of course, a new generation, they see the potential in their opportunities for career development as Europeans. and not wanting to be held back by just the current political malaise that seems to be surrounding all of us at the moment. So there was positivity there. And one particular takeaway which struck a chord with me was that students in general, people, and also some who were staff at the university, they were feeling quite positive about the fact that someone had got their back. They were not all aware, of course, about the Young European Movement. They were not all aware of even the European Movement UK. And the fact that there was someone doing this work unknown to them, because we're talking about young people who've got many more things in their lives than what we perhaps would be studying at the moment. But they had this sudden brightening up of their ideas. And they thought, really, well, I didn't know that. Oh, that's fantastic. And suddenly these people were encouraged by the fact of what is going on behind the scenes. We need to raise the profile, I think, of what the Young European Movement are doing far more, so that people who are maybe not necessarily at refreshers meetings where we have a good positive audience, but just the average person knows about Young European Movement, and the average person knows about European Movement UK. This is the difficulty, and that's what we're all participating in, raising the profile of. But it's well worth doing wherever you happen to be in the UK, and I think you'll get some very positive results. That was about it, really. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Phil. And I'm also aware that some of our Wales for Europe members, particularly the Cardiff for Wales ones, have been very active in Freshers' Weeks in the various higher education institutions in Cardiff. It is a very important piece of work, as you say. Alex, come in, please.
Hello. So I'm Alex. I basically wanted to sort of like highlight the European Solidarity Corps and the like not so organizationally linked opportunities. Because although like some of our speakers have sort of tried to highlight the diversity, it's still sort of missing my experience with Erasmus Plus, which was because it was long enough ago now. It was under the European Voluntary Service title, but that's been split out and renamed to European Solidarity Corps. But basically, I was able to go and live in Norway for a year. Sorry, I was getting feedback from Andrew. Yeah, so I was able to actually learn some Norwegian. I did all sorts. I worked with the local volunteer centre, so sometimes I was running the project Bua in Norway, where anyone can come and for free borrow some like outdoor or sports equipment, which is fantastic for opening up opportunities for those with sort of less financial resources. And a lot of the refugee children that lived in the same town as I did were able to come and borrow bikes and roller skates and stuff to have fun with. I was helping out in English lessons in schools. We were running concerts and a theatre festival occasionally. And there was like all sorts of different bits. And I had maybe a grand to my name in savings at that point. And if any of you know anything about Norway, it's probably that it's expensive and that it's pretty. But it basically meant that I was able to do something I never would have been able to do just on my own. And that wasn't me going with a particular organization. It was just this volunteer center in Norway had some space for volunteers, and I applied and they chose me. I'd applied to a couple of different opportunities, but it means I didn't already have to be a part of an organization. And the fact that it's for a year is quite frankly amazing. And so I think that's a part of like Erasmus Plus that we need back, and that's quite unusual. Like I think the sports and different organizations is great. Definitely keep that. But I think the also opportunities for those not within an organization already is quite important, in just making it available to anyone. And like you could do that with or without a degree. I didn't have a degree. I still don't. And so like although I like the idea of these education and studying abroad, it wasn't relevant to me, but this can be relevant to anyone because some of the other volunteers I was with in the town already had degrees, some others didn't, and yeah, I think those also need to be talked about and supported and like people told about them, because every time I've just sort of found another random young person that wasn't already in the Erasmus Plus world and said, "Do you know this is a thing?" No one's ever known about it. So, yeah.
Thank you, Alex. And Andrew.
Hello, everyone. Hi, can you hear me? Yep. I'm here representing Save Freedom of Movement. I studied languages at university and had a year abroad in Spain and Germany. Absolutely loved it. Did the language assistantship scheme. And much of my career success to date has been because of the freedom of movement I've enjoyed across Europe since I graduated. And I think really the missing piece of the puzzle for me is I'm keen to understand how we can get more young people behind the idea of freedom of movement or better visa waivers. So my question really is we've got young people interested in better things in Europe for young people, but how can we mobilize young people to get better things for everyone in terms of Europe? Because I think that the government scheme, when you talk to young people about what they actually want, they describe something that's delivered by freedom of movement or is described or is delivered by visa waivers. They very rarely say, I want a capped 2-year scheme that's limited at 70,000 places, or they don't say they want a one in, one out kind of scheme. What they seem to say they want is freedom of movement, but they don't actually ask for that because I think that it's not widely understood what that actually means. So that's really what I sort of float is how can we get more young people in behind the idea of mobility?
I think it's a very good question, Andrew. I don't know if Ollie or Madalena want to come back on that. But what really annoys me, really wants me to take my shoes off and throw them at the television, is when Ms. Reeves or Mr. Starmer boast that they've abolished freedom of movement, as if they've done something good. And I'm shouting, how dare you? How dare you remove freedom of movement and then boast about it?
Well, I stood next to a young person in the pub after the last Rejoin march, and we were talking about this issue. And I said, what do you think about freedom movement? And they said to me they didn't agree with it because it brought people on small boats across the channel. At which point I was like horrified, and I kind of thought, oh my god, so
that's exactly what they want you to think.
Exactly, and this was somebody who turned up to the Rejoin march who had that opinion, and they thought that the only way forward was visa schemes. Where'd you go with that?
Alex, you've raised your hand again.
So I don't know if it's maybe going to be a controversial opinion, but I think when it comes to sort of politics and political engagement in the UK, we sort of don't tend to bother involving young people and then complain that they're not engaged. And it was like my experience in Norway, the youth political parties there actually have their own different policies to the adult parties, because in Norway they have like a political list. It's more of a proportional system. The youth parties actually like try to get their candidates onto the main party list. So a lot of the time, the second candidate on a party's list in Norway is a young person, because the like youth wing of the political party has moved and voted to get them there. I was watching one of the like election programs the one day, and it was aimed at youth, and like you're talking sort of young teenager, like 10 upwards kind of aim. But rather than just like being something very, very dumbed down. They weren't asking the political questions in an adult way. One of the questions that stuck in my mind is like, if your party was an animal, what party would it be? The politicians were answering that in a political way. The one chose a dog because they're loyal, they support you, that kind of thing, and actually making political points within this. And one of the papers has a youth section where like people of between certain ages write articles and submit them to the paper, and they will get published. And I come back and look at the UK, and all I see is basically politicians ignoring young people, and like political parties very often just sort of ignoring young people and then complaining that young people don't bother engaging. And it's like,
What I see in the
as a
UK,
young person, it feels like we don't get listened to.
yeah. What I see in the UK is young people are welcome to talk about issues that concern young people. But when it comes to issues that affect the whole of society, I agree with you. They're probably not included. So is the problem that the young people don't feel that mobility for everyone is a topic they can even talk about? Do they feel constrained to this Erasmus topic and youth mobility? I don't know. Is that the problem?
I think it's more of a like a general, even like when there are issues that like are about young people, like education policy, I don't get the feeling that there is much of a like effort to engage young people. Stuff's written in newspapers designed for old people. It doesn't feel like there's that much of a way to sort of have that dialogue.
So it's involving them. So it's
Yeah.
involving them in the national policies, not just in youth policies, isn't it? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well,
Yeah. Yeah.
both having more involvement in youth policies because it affects young people, and like trying to involve them more in national policies. There are some projects I'm aware of that are good, but they're very much sort of local and or voluntary. Like the British Youth Council have their Make Your Mark ballot every year, and I used to distribute, like where I could within my school, ballots to young people so that there was representation, but it was sort of in a way up to the young people to get it done. It wasn't like the schools distributed it in all of the classes with some context about what it was. It was, I negotiated with some teachers to stand up in certain classes and talk about it and get the ballots filled in.
Yeah, well,
and I think it's just like we need to have more of a culture of young people's having a voice in debate. And like in the newspapers, if several newspapers were to set up sort of youth sections where they had articles written by young people with young people's views that went out nationally, it might feel more like we can have a decent voice as young people. But I think especially for the like pre 18 or 16, depending where you live, there's not that much that's sort of widely known of youth policy. Where I lived in Penarth, they had the Penarth Youth Action, which worked with the council, but again, that's very local. I think it was great. I loved being a part of it, but it, unless you sort of knew about it, again, it's not something you were like where there's much publicity.
Thanks for that, Alex. One thing that we are missing, not just in Wales but throughout the UK, I think, is local journalism written by actual journalists. And when you mention newspapers, you don't associate those with young people anymore because there aren't any young people who go to newspapers for their news. I think that all sorts of issues have just been raised, all of them very pertinent in Wales at this moment, where we've got votes for 16-year-olds. We've got a proportional representation general election coming up next year. And we've got questions about civic education. It's there in the new Welsh curriculum, in theory, but in practice, I don't know whether the delivery of civic education has actually been sorted out yet. And it is getting a bit urgent now because of the possibility of reform. Thank God we've got a proportional representation, because if it was first past the post, I think we'd be automatically looking at a reform government in Wales a year's time. It's PR that's going to save us from that, hopefully. Anyway, Madalena, you want to come in?
Yeah, I want to comment on this youth engagement thing, obviously, as my role at European Movement. I think my opinion differs a little bit from Alex on this. I would like to emphasize that there has been some positive progress recently, I think, with granting votes at 16, which I think will help to instill at an earlier age participation in democracy, and young people feeling like they have a voice and that their voice matters and that they can contribute to these political discussions. Having said that, I think there is a massive problem with youth apathy, and it's something that I've encountered over and over again. I was very active in the Remain movement since 2016, and I have to say my overall experience of that was that the demographic of the movement tended to be older people, and that there weren't that many young people involved. And often when I tried to get them involved, there was a huge reluctance and this issue of apathy, and it's something that I also experienced with my siblings as well. And I think there's various factors behind that. One of which I think does come down to education in schools. I had zero political education. I went to state schools in Leicestershire, which were specialist sports colleges. But they had no political education. I did not know how UK government worked. I did not know what MPs did. And I did not know how the European Parliament worked either, or many of the benefits of EU membership until after I started campaigning with the Remain movement. I was really struck by this when I had a conversation with a friend of mine who is a doctor. She's an A&E doctor. She is well educated, and in the last EU elections that we were eligible to vote in 2019, she actually told me that she didn't vote in these elections because she said she didn't know what an MEP did. This is a doctor. This is someone who's highly educated. We just don't know. We don't understand how politics works, and we therefore don't understand how we can participate in it and why it matters that we participate. So I think that there should be better political education in schools. It cannot just be the reserve of privately educated elites that they receive an education in politics and they're the only ones interested to go on to be politicians, because then we create a society which is being ruled by a certain class of person, which leads to greater inequality, which is one of the reasons I think that we are facing this in society. But in addition to that, I think one of the big barriers to youth participation is the cost of living crisis, is the jobs market, is the reality of the world that youth face, where they're just struggling to get by, to make ends meet, and to get on. And you know, being politically active and taking advantage of opportunities kind of seems a bit distant from them and not a priority. And I think if we want more young people to be active in civil society and democracy, then we need to give them greater support so that they can do those things. Those are like sort of my main observations from the work that I've done.
Thank you, Madalena. Karen?
I'll keep my comment brief, as I know a lot of people want to comment on that as well. I can see lots of hands up, which is great. Just really briefly, just another reflection to add. So over the last year, I ran sessions to around 1,000 students across Wales, so usually going to schools on Fridays. Really enjoy it, as in just sessions on just on how politics works, where decisions are made, and that kind of stuff, basically. But my main reflection is that there is a lack of there's a lack of understanding, and for good reason, in terms of who makes what decisions. And I think that was really important, was actually fielding out what it was that the young people cared about, particularly maybe in their local community, but then linking actually how they can actually influence that. So something that I was trying to encourage doing, because I speak to primary schools as well, which I really enjoy doing, is encouraging them to write to their member of parliament or member of Senedd, like guiding them to be like, this is the person that makes that decision, write to them, and then that would be the action. And the whole idea of that is that if they can just once write to their MP or MS or councillor just once in their life, when something else comes up in the future that they really, really are struggling with or want to share their opinion on, then they've done it that once before. And it's about having that way of like kind of really starting that conversation from a very young age, because I think most people that do write to their MPs or MSs or councillors are people that are really, really politically engaged. But that's something that I think is important to change, is actually encouraging just that small action. And accidentally once, but there was a primary school that I went into of like 150 7-8-year-olds, they all wrote to the Prime Minister. So they wrote to Keir Starmer about the winter fuel allowance. So because that was something that they raised and cared about, and they all after that lesson wrote a letter. And just things like that, I feel like can make a difference. As in, if it's not about just, oh, what do you care about? Oh, okay. Oh, here's this thing that you can do. And then to just, even if it's a small action, whether that's signing a petition or writing a letter or going to your first protest, but that kind of link, and like, how do you first get involved in politics? Because if you've never been involved, how do you get there, basically? That was all I want to say.
Thank you, Carmen. And if Starmer had listened to your pupils when they wrote to him and acted on it, he'd be in a much better position now, to be honest. Gabriella.
Hello. Let's see. Okay. Well, I think all these ideas about Erasmus, I think that's wonderful if it came back. So all the support for that. In the meantime, I think there are positive things we can do. And I don't know about where you are based, but Cardiff is twinned with Stuttgart and Nantes, and we have sort of restarted in a way, if you like. After 70 years, we've been twinned with Stuttgart, and quite a lot of groups, choirs and walking groups, they've now sort of disbanded because they don't feel there is any need. There's no interest in twinning anymore. And we feel exactly the opposite, because we haven't got Erasmus. We haven't got those opportunities. We've sort of tried to sort of almost focus on the twinning links, because that's at least a way of getting our people in Cardiff, a small group of people, to interact with a different culture and different people's thinking and different languages. And also, when you do go abroad to any country, people ask you about your country. And I think the political side that you mentioned, that we have so little information about our political system, often it comes out when you go abroad and they ask you, well, what do you do? How does your government work? And you suddenly realize that you don't know. So I think whether you are in a household where there is little money, or in a household where there's more money, I think that interaction with another country is very important for all of our mental or our education and our development, because we do need people in leadership who also have that openness to other cultures, and who don't just know their schooling and their environment and their class. And so I think, although I agree with Taith in Wales, I think it's a really good program. I do feel that those people who don't fit into that category are, in a way, not that they're not disqualified or anything, but I personally feel it's a shame to make it into tears yet again. So I think it's something that every part of society needs to come into contact with other cultures in Europe, ideally.
And it's always a good idea if those other cultures aren't all American ones. You know, it would be nice. Would be nice to have some more European films with subtitles on the telly. I suppose we are going more in that direction these days. And I think the good news is that young people are very open actually to that sort of thing. But when we turn on the mainstream TV, it's always American news top of the list. We've got a podcast called Americast. There is no Eurocast. And the BBC journalists, who are very fluent talking about American politics, are really tongue-tied when it comes to translating what's happening over in our nearest
It's
neighbours.
very interesting you say that, because in Sweden they have had that, they've gone that way, and they realize that they know very little about the East.
Yeah. Thank you, Gabriella. Any other raised hands at all? Okay, well, I think we've had a really good discussion. Thank you all for attending. I think if the younger generation amongst us, Carmen, Ollie, and Madalena, and Alex and others, if you do one thing for us, it's go back to young people and try and make them a little bit angry that these politicians, these people that Robin Day called here today and go tomorrow people, who do they think they are? They had the cheek to take away your freedom of movement. How dare they? Just get a little bit annoyed. I don't say go out and occupy the Senate or pick up cobbles from the streets and throw them at the riot police, but do just get a little bit angry and protest about it. Okay, unless anybody else wants to say a salutation, I'll say diolch yn fawr iawn pawb and noswaith dda. Nos da.